I'm not giving you the whole trigger formula, guys, because that's like really intense and that's in the gauntlet. So I'm just telling you the communication aspect of the trigger. Now, two things: listening and speaking, right? I am not an advocate for only listening and not saying like what you really feel to someone else, because that completely invalidates yourself. So I'm not trying to say, okay, just listen and don't react and just absorb it and take it easy. Because what if someone's saying shit? What if someone's saying things you don't really agree with? So like I said, calm yourself down. Don't react at the start, listen. But now's the magic piece of this thing, when you actually need to communicate. When you're communicating with the partner, especially romantically, this tends to happen, or with somebody else, use I statements. Don't come at it with a you statement. If you use a you statement, you'll realize how fucking quickly your ego will latch onto it to want to blame, shame, or judge someone else. So immediately saying like, you did this, blah, blah, blah. You made me feel that way, blah, blah, blah. You're like dysregulating me. You're really triggering me. Like this was another like very popular piece that I received from like exes, was when someone would say like, you're really triggering me. I was like, okay, I get that I'm the trigger, but I also understand that like, you can ground yourself. You don't have to be like yelling back. You don't have to be doing something in this moment. And that really taught me that if I'm making someone else responsible for how I feel in that moment, not only am I putting a lot of pressure on them. So when I say you're triggering me, you're making me feel this way, but I'm also pushing them to come up with a solution, which is very unfair, very unrealistic, and will not lead to regulation, right? So when you're saying to someone, you're triggering me, you expect them to say, to not trigger you. When you say to someone, you're making me feel like shit, you're also saying to them, I expect you to not make me feel like shit, right? So you're putting all of the power of your emotions in their hands, which is not just unfair, it's actually really stupid to do, because you're giving away the power of your own emotions. You're giving away the power to regulate, control, and ground yourself. You're basically saying, I'm not strong enough to feel a certain way, so I'm making you responsible for making me feel this way. Does that make sense? When you say to someone, you're making me feel this way, is like saying, I'm not powerful enough to feel a certain way, so I'm making you make me feel a certain way. And that's pretty shitty, right? Like if you think about it, we're absolving ourselves of like the control, the balance of feeding a certain way. So instead, if you also, the other thing about you using you statements is, remember what I said at the start, there are two people's egos involved. So just in that beautiful conversation with Ingrid, right? When we talked about how when I say something, I want to be heard. What if the other person has their own trauma for the last 30, 40 years, their own stories, their own inner child is like fighting and wrestling and be like, I want to speak, like I also want to be heard. Then they're trying to be heard, they're not being heard. I'm trying to be heard, I'm not being heard. And I'm not considering them at all. But yet I want to have a relationship with them. I want to have babies with them. I want to have a fucking partnership with them. But I'm not willing to understand that their fucking inner child is fucked up. So all of this is coming just from my perspective, right? So it's important in this moment now, when listening to, okay, what is it that they may be feeling, or how can I say this in such a way that I'm not trying to like trigger them? More importantly, to realize that, do they have an inner child? Yes. Are they hurting? Yes. Do they have a story that's weighing on them while they're trying to communicate with me? Yes. So if you recognize that in any conversation, using you statements is not going to be very healthy or safe or beneficial, because the you statement is going to trigger their ego. It's going to trigger their defense mechanism. If at the end of the day, what you really want is to have good communication, good connection, constructive like decision making at the end of it, triggering someone's ego is not going to help you, right? So instead, now let's come back to the I statements. Why I love I statements is because you can actually communicate what you're feeling by not making the other person feel responsible for what they should be doing or how they should feel. So for example, and this is another really tricky one. So if I say communicate with I statements, sometimes people will say like, okay, yeah, does this work? I feel, or I think that you're making me feel like shit, or I think that you're triggering me. I was like, nope, that doesn't work. So eliminate the yous as best you can and focus on the I's. So instead, let's say you're actually feeling invalidated in that moment. So instead of saying you invalidating me, you're not listening to me, say instead, I don't feel heard right now. Or I really want this part of me to be heard. I really want you if you're talking to the partner, or I really wish, or I really desire, I really want this part of me to be witnessed right now, or to be heard, or I really just want to be understood around this particular topic. Now, if you feel like you're not being understood about something else, say, I feel like this part of me is not being listened to. You can even, like, I love and would encourage you to be even more vulnerable with it, to say, I'm really scared in this particular moment. And I want you to know that's why I'm getting reactive. I'm really scared, maybe, that I'm not going to be heard. I'm really scared that a lot of my past shit's going to come up in this moment. When you say stuff like that, you'll realize that the other person's like, whoa, maybe I should be softer, on what this person's saying. So if you lead by saying, like, I'm working through these wounds, and these wounds show up in this particular, like, conversation, or when I get triggered around this, or, I know I get triggered when I'm invalidated. I'm really trying to work on it. But what I do need right now is I need someone to just hold space and understand that. When you say stuff like that, the other person now feels responsible in some way to say, okay, how can I show up in a more positive manner? How can I show up in a way that can actually help you with what you need? And you may not realize it, but that actually leads to better conversation for both of you. So there's a whole example load of, like, how you can use I statements. So for example, in sometimes when you're drawing a boundary or something, right? Instead of saying you need to stay away, you need to give me space, instead say, I need some space in our relationship, and I need to be able to process my feelings. Any of those particular things. But when you use the I statements, the magic of it is you're giving yourself a chance to actually be heard, and you're giving the other person a chance to actually, like, show up for you in that way that you need, the support that you need, if you're vulnerable enough to use it and say it. The I statement in that way also disarms your own ego. So you're not attempting to, like I said, judge, project, shame. You're not attempting to get some favorable outcome. You're just trying to say, like, I feel this particular way. And then after you're done with the I statements, continue your regulation, because the regulation of the breath work or the grounding after that can also really help you to process, how was I showing up in that conversation? What was I doing? What did I ask for? Any of those things. It allows you to better process and have a realistic viewpoint of how you really showed up. Whereas again, if you're dysregulated and you're pissed off and you go back, all you're feeling is so, like, triggered that you see the conversation in a very different way. You just see the conversation as someone else not listening to you, someone else invalidating you, someone else being the asshole. And you're not able to witness what actually triggered you, where you can actually be heard, how you can actually ask to be listened to, or any of that. But an I statement without regulation is almost useless, because, like I said, imagine if you're really, like, flared up and challenged, and you're going to, like, judge someone or project or shame. You'll get into the same thing of thinking, I think you're an asshole. You'll get into, like, something like that where you use an I word, but it ends up blaming or shaming them. Hey, and welcome to the Inner Yats YouTube page. If you like our content, make sure you click the like and the subscribe button so that you get more of these amazing videos that keep coming your way.